that they was not in the chain of command that they could share in and confide in when they're back home. Their wives were struggling, their kids were suffering, and they just wanted to be a part, and they knew they were separated. They wanted to talk about their work environment. They wanted to talk about their job. They wanted to talk about their dreams and aspirations. And yes, for some, they needed protection. They wanted their meals because they needed kosher requirements. Or even in one case in which we had a situation in which a Wiccan who wanted to have a place where they could perform their services, and we provided that for them. That's not the faith that I subscribe to, but it is my job as a chaplain. It is my role to provide that for them so that they can. We've got to quit playing games, and we definitely have to quit playing games with our fundamental freedoms. You see, we can talk about what we want to do and how we want to do it, but I believe many people are just wanting to know why this matters. Why is Doug Collins talking about this on the floor tonight? Why is he talking about these issues of individual freedom, fiscal responsibility, and constitutionally limited government? Why? Because it matters. Because it is the things that make us free. I've also taken seriously our Second Amendment rights and seeing what has happened up here and not taking into account or discounting the needs that we have in our society for a responsible firearm ownership. But we cannot take away the rights of those gun owners in our country and those who want to own guns simply on a whim or a political agenda. We don't need to do that. Why? Because it matters. When we look at this, one of the issues that I've had over my last few months is I was driving home one night, and in the midst of all this debate in Washington about should we curb gun rights, should we do background checks, should we do a lot of different things, I thought to myself, what did my dad, and I even have a father-in-law who grew up shooting, and he talks about the way he would shoot, target shooting, as he was growing up and shooting squirrels and other things. And what I found is whether it was my father-in-law, T.J. Kemp, or my daddy, Leonard Collins, they had a commonality. But what the commonality was is they understood gun ownership also meant gun responsibility. And so as I was driving home one night, I said, what can we do in the 9th District of Georgia to promote responsible gun ownership? Or here's that word responsible again. We've got to be responsible with what we have. So what we did is we said we're going to have gun safety events. And we put on several gun safety events, and well over 300 people attended these events. And they were put on by the local sheriff's department for those, because what also I was hearing was many people were going out and buying guns for the first time because they didn't think the guns were going to be around. So they were in my district, gun shops were overflowing and people were buying guns. And I said, what can we do to make sure that gun rights and ownership and our Second Amendment principles are balanced with the responsibility that is given? And these people showed up, and they learned how to store their weapons. They learned how to take care of their weapons. They learned what they should do and what they shouldn't do. That is responsible government. That is taking what we do here and making it matter to the folks on Main Street, in the high schools, in the stores, in the shops that we go into every day. And that's what's going to put conservative ideas back on the map, by attaching them to what matters. And by attaching them to who and what we are. Because when we attach it to the dinner table, when we get to the point where we say this is why it matters, instead of the vast rhetoric of this world, then we will be able to say, and people can look at us and say, that's why they think that a balanced budget is necessary. That's why they believe that the Obamacare legislation is so bad. Not because we're fighting against a president we don't like, but because it doesn't make sense. And it cost us jobs. It cost us money. It cost our people trust in the government that I hold so dear. You see, when you understand this, you move to fiscal responsibility, or as I say here, fiscal irresponsibility. Only up here can you talk about it. And I was in state government, and I dealt in similar terms. But I remember here the first 2 weeks I was in this chamber, and you can debate the good or the bad, but we spent $60 billion my first 2 weeks up here. That's 3 Georgia budgets. 3 Georgia budgets in 2 weeks. And it wasn't that I was not in Georgia anymore. I wasn't in Kansas anymore either, Toto. I wasn't there. Something wasn't making sense. But we've got to get back to a fiscal responsibility approach. $17 trillion in debt is a national disgrace. And it's a national disgrace because you can't go into anyone's household, knock off the zeros, knock off whatever you want to do, and then apply it to your family budget. If you happen to be watching tonight or you happen to see this later, I want you to do something. Just apply the same concepts to your home budget. And whether you're Democrat or Republican, we can come to the understanding that numbers don't lie. And when you've got $17 trillion in debt, you're taking in this amount of money and you're spending this amount of money, and you can't reconcile the two. It's not because we're making a better country. It's because we're not making the hard choices that you have to make every day in your homes and in your businesses, and that's what we've got to get back to. That's what this country needs to get back to. It is not about the vast rhetoric. We can debate the big things all we want, but what we've got to understand is when we debate the big things and we miss the small things, people lose trust in us. And we got to stop that. That's why I believe that the Republican budget presents a smart, fiscally sound policy. It balances our federal budgets and allows hardworking Georgians and Missourians and North Carolinians and others to actually keep more of their own money. That's a novel concept. I truly believe, as much as I like this city, and I love to go at night and see Lincoln, I love to go see Jefferson Memorial, I love to look around at the museums and see the history that just oozes from this place. But I tell you what, I want to come here and spend my money, and I want folks from Georgia to come up here to spend their hard-earned money, their tourist dollars. I don't want Georgians to have to, or anybody else in this country, to have to look to the government to be sending money. I want us to be able to earn that money and to have a free enterprise system that works again and is not crippled by government that is too big and too large. In addition to the budget that we passed, the federal budget, and balancing it in 10 years, which again is a novel concept because undoubtedly on the other side of the building here and other places, they don't ever seem to think a balanced budget is necessary. Explain that to your banker next time you go in. The House budget cuts $4.6 trillion over the next decade. It simplifies the tax code. It repeals Obamacare, protects Medicare, and increases energy exploration. Again, we can tell you the how. We can tell you the what, but why about why? Why does this matter? Why do these things that I just talked about matter? Because they end up putting more responsibility in individual households. They end up putting more money in individual billfolds, and they end up getting the government back in the proportion it has. It's been said many times, fire is a great thing. I love fire. I love a fire outside. I love a pit outside. But you know something? As long as that fire is wonderful, it's when it's inside its constraints. When it's inside the fire pit, then you cook with it, you warm yourself with it, and you can make sure that it doesn't burn down the whole forest. But once it gets outside that fire ring, then it can burn down the whole forest. And I live up in an area which is inhabited with a lot of forest. And we've seen a lot of forest fires. We've seen a lot of missed mistakes when using fire. And I'm just going to say the same thing is true with our budget. What matters in our budget and why it matters, and I believe to most Americans, is we can't allow the debt and the crushing debt to begin to get outside as it has already, outside of that ring, and start taking everything else with it. You know, I wish that the administration felt the same as I did, but they don't. In fact, what happens in theirs is their budget, as opposed to balancing, actually had more taxes, more spending, more borrowing, the same thing that we gotten into. I heard a friend across the aisle today talk about the issue that if you do the same thing over and over and expect a different result, it's the definition of insanity. Well, we're doing the same things over and over again and expecting different results. We actually have to cut spending to get a balanced budget. You actually have to do things in a budget that is so overgrown. The first thing we need to do is begin cutting. Remembering, for those of you who say no, and you're looking at the screen right now and you're saying, no, we got to raise taxes. Remember, we did that at the end of the year. It's now time for some cutting. When we look ahead, I also looked at fiscal responsibility, and that's why I was pleased that this House adopted unanimously an amendment that I had for Camp Merrill, which is where our rangers are trained. And what it will do is transfer the land from forestry to the DOD, which will ensure we save millions of dollars in taxpayer money at Camp Merrill, while at the same time providing them with an increased amount of security. And in doing so, I believe this just makes common sense. And for some who will say, you know, what does that matter to me? Well, it matters when I looked at this situation, and this is inside my district. They told me that two government agencies, DOD and Forestry, had been negotiating for 20 years. 20 years. An agency of the government and an agency of the government, both paid by mine and your tax dollars, both serving us.